Hello everyone, my name is Danielle Harper Scott and this is my week 2 multimedia discussion post. My discussion is going to be framed off of attribution theory. I'm going to highlight a couple of the main points of four authors that so let's go ahead and begin with what is attribution theory. So attribution theory is an idea that one's behaviors are related to personal experiences and personal traits, and that an individual makes assumptions based on what is relevant to them or behavioral judgments. So understanding these attributions can be helpful when trying to influence or persuade others. So the first author that I am going to review would be Sillars. He wrote the article or the journal Attributions and Communications in Roommate Conflicts, and this was in 1980. So the pages that I'm going to be referring to is page 180 through 200. So Sillars begins his article by discussing how a group of college roommates were asked to describe the conflict that they've experienced with their roommates, and most of the responses that came back were based on the incompatibility or the personal disconnects between the two. So the complaints were based off of they had nothing in common. So the conflicts were attributed to incompatibility. So in Siller's journal, he pretty much studied the theoretical approach to impersonal conflicts. So Siller found that the decisions in conflicts are influenced by attributions of individuals. Siller has also found that the ineffective communications may be a part or a result of two individuals' behaviors being incompatible. So furthering the journal, Solo also discussed that there are three propositions that specify a relationship, which include attributions, conflict strategies, and conflict outcomes. He also explained that people choose conflict strategies based off of three different factors. So one would be the attributions about one's intent to cooperate, and then two would be their beliefs that they're responsible for conflict, and lastly would be the stability of conflict. And lastly, the main point of this article or this journal would be that attributions create expectations. For example, one can anticipate a given reaction and thereby they can develop a strategy. And lastly, that attributions affect emotional reactions, and that they also create biases that are developed in the attribution process, and these biases tend to discourage integrative conflict resolution. So Sillars and Scott in 1983 wrote Interpersonal Perceptions Between Intimates and Integrative Review, and this was in 1983. So Sillars and Scott discussed how the interpersonal perceptions between intimates are affected by different factors such as familiarity, emotionality, behavioral interdependence, and an individual's beliefs about intimacy. So Sillars and Scott also identified that the roles of perceptual biases in intimate conflict and relationship adjustments. The author suggests that an agreed perception is important to satisfy So the next journal would be The Psychology of Interpersonal Relations, written by Heider in 1958. So as mentioned in the title, the journal focuses on the idea of interpersonal relations. So this includes how one person thinks or feels about another person and how he or she perceives themselves and how he or she reacts to actions. So the author believes that an individual's concern lies within surface matters. So surface matters occur within an event that occurs in everyday life, more on a conscious level rather than with a an unconscious process. So on page 5, there's a discussion about common sense psychology, which focuses on understanding interpersonal relationships. So common sense psychology guides behaviors towards other people and So, lastly, we have Bradley, who wrote Self Serving Biases in the Attribution Process in 1978. So, this journal analyzed a number of different studies and found that there's a strong support for causal asymmetry that serves as evidence for self serving or defensive attribution. So, the pages that I'm going to be looking at or examining is going to be page 63 through 65. So the research discusses that the concept of defensive attribution and how many researchers have identified the importance of self-serving causal attributions. However, they have not recognized that the nature of an individual's interpretive activities may be a critical component of the underlying behavioral outcomes. So the article ends off by pretty much going over that the attribution process is neither purely cognitive nor purely motivational, but rather it contains elements from both. So that concludes my presentation. I tried to go over it as briefly as possible while hitting on some of the main components. Thank you guys.